I think my superpower is just like, as the race goes on, I fatigue slower than most people. So if you put a big climb at the beginning of the race, I'll get dropped probably by the climbers. But if you put it at the end of the race, I'll be able to keep up with them much more so, just because I feel like I fatigue a lot slower than other people. So I think I have just really good endurance. The race is won at the end, not at the beginning. So for me, that's what I focus on. I don't specialize in any one thing, but because I can do all of them well enough, I usually can make it to that final selection. And then it's kind of, how do I finish? What's the actual finale look like? So I really like to attack. Like, I like to go on solo attacks at the end of races. So I'd say that's also my style. Just try and go out solo and finish alone. So
that was Kristen Faulkner. This is Marnie Salop. Thanks for tuning into my podcast, Marnie on the Move. Each week, I will be inviting interesting, innovative movers and shakers to join me on the show and share their story. You will discover and hear from thought leaders, experts, influencers, and entrepreneurs from the worlds of wellness, sports, beauty, fitness, fashion, and more. Marnie on the Move will feature an eclectic mix of people I know, work with, and think are generally doing cool things. On each episode, I sync up with my guests about life, career, and training, and showcase their expertise and story. Hello, welcome, and welcome back to the Marnie on the Move podcast. I'm your host, Marnie Salop. I don't know about you, but I am super duper pumped to watch Le Tour de France Femme avec Zwift this weekend, Sunday, July 24th on Peacock. I am equally psyched to bring you today's guest, pro cyclist Kristen Faulkner, who is racing on Team Bike Exchange JCO and is known as an all-rounder on her team. If you don't already subscribe to Peacock, I highly recommend you do. It will be worth every penny. Le Tour de France Femme avec Zwift is a major big deal in women's sports, cycling, and history. You gotta watch. It's gonna be awesome. When Kristen Faulkner moved to New York City to pursue her career in finance and venture capital, she thought getting into triathlon would be a fun idea. She already loved running and swimming and was on the varsity teams in high school. She was also on the varsity rowing team while studying computer science at Harvard. Clearly, athletics was in her DNA. Cycling, however, was her weakest link. So she joined a local cycling organization here in New York City to improve her technique and confidence on the bike. This weekend, she's competing in Le Tour de France avec Zwift. For all my local listeners in New York City, New Jersey, Brooklyn, Kristen used to be a regular on 9W and in Central Park. During our conversation, Kristen and I sync up about what she truly loves about cycling, how she went from recreational cyclist and a career in venture capital and finance to becoming a professional cyclist. We discuss our mutual love of Zwift and how she got into e-racing during the pandemic. And of course, we talk a little bit about her love of graveling. I get the scoop on what she's reading and what she does when she's not out on her bike. Kristen and I caught up before the official teams were decided for Le Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, and she was about to compete in Le Tour de Suisse. Since then, she came in second overall final at this race. She had 2 stage wins at Giro d'Anne and came in third overall at Itzulia Women's Stage Race. Now, it's time to watch her on the tour. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. It's easy. Head over to your Apple app, click on Marnie on the Move, scroll through the episodes, click on the 5 stars, and leave a review. Also, feel free to share this episode wherever you like to get social. LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever is your jam. Now, on to my conversation with Kristen. It is so great to have you on the podcast today. I'm also really jealous that you live in Girona.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to live here, but I also don't want to overhype it. Like it's not like a paradise.
But you like
Yeah, no, I do like it. I think it's a great place to have as your first home away from home if you're moving to Europe, just because there's a lot of English speaking people here and there's a lot of cyclists. And so you get to know the community pretty quickly.
It's like 9W.
Yeah, except a little bit with a little better cafes.
Better cafes, better donuts,
more
better
cafes.
Coffee, more culture.
Yeah. And then a few less, big trucks going by.
So just in case people are tuning in, we're talking about Girona, my next destination for cycling. I love how you rode from Spain to France the other day, like New York to New Jersey.
Yeah, it's funny. Everything in Europe is so close and the countries are so close. It's like little states in a way, riding from one state to the next. I'm from Alaska. So riding from one state to the other when I was growing up just seemed absurd. And here I am riding from one country to the other in one day. So everything's perspective for sure.
Yeah. So you're born and raised in Alaska.
Yes, I was born and raised there. Yeah. And then, I went to boarding school for high school when I was 14 on the East Coast, but then I would go back every year for summer and Christmas and Thanksgiving. So Alaska is very much my home and my parents are still there. So
that's great. I just met a woman from Alaska who is a Brooks ambassador, and she was so cool. She's also a pilot. She's a runner. She does endurance events, and I'm going to have her on the podcast, but she was just so interesting. And she said she had to learn how to fly so she could get out of her town.
Yeah. There's a lot of towns in Alaska that are not accessible by road. So the only way to get there is to fly.
Living in New York City, that sounds really nice, right? And
yeah, it's funny. It's like the grass is always greener, But when I moved to New York City, I think there were more people on my square block than in my entire hometown back home in Alaska. And I think there were more people on the Upper East Side than in all of Alaska, or there's something like that, like more people in Manhattan or something. But yeah, it was crazy.
It's so funny. It's true. The grass is always greener on the other side, because it's like, I feel like, I've lived in Manhattan my entire life, and I've traveled and I've gone to Europe and I've been to other places. But at the end of the day, this is where I live. And there's some fantasy in my mind of what it would be like to live in Alaska or in Girona or, somewhere where I could just walk out my front door, get on my bike and skip potholes, traffic lights, people, dogs, strollers, Yeah. But then I know there's, I get to get food in the middle of the night just next door at the deli. And
you don't have to deal with siestas when everything's closed from 2 to 5 p.m. every day.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's a trade-off. So dial me in, because we're talking about trade-offs in New York City and Alaska, and you are a professional cyclist and you're crushing it right now on your team. I'm following you on Instagram. But you weren't always a professional cyclist. You went to Harvard. You studied computer science. You grew up in Alaska, then moved for boarding school for high school to Massachusetts, then went to Harvard, then moved to New York City, then moved to San Francisco, and now you're in Spain. So, parallel to that, you were working in the corporate world, and then you got into pro cycling. So take me through this journey of yours, and how did you get into cycling?
Yeah, it'd be a pretty roundabout life path for people who don't know me. So I've always been really into athletics and sports. Growing up in Alaska, that was kind of what we did after school. I did multiple sports, swimming, cross country, everything. And then when I went away to boarding school, that's where I learned how to row. So I became a rower in the spring in college. And then I also was a swimmer and a cross country runner. And so throughout college as well, I was a rower. And then when I moved to New York City after college, I really missed being part of a team, and I missed that athletic outlet. And I was working a pretty competitive job, and I just really wanted to be on a team, do a team sport. And then also being in New York City, I needed to get outside every day and just feel that greenery, feel the wind on my face, something other than tall buildings. I actually went for an introductory women's clinic to learn how to ride my bike. And I borrowed a bike that was my boyfriend at the time. He was over 6 feet, I think 6'3", and this really big bike. And I showed up in sneakers and running shorts and had no idea what I was doing. And running sunglasses and short socks and all that.
Was it New York City Cycling Club?
It was CRCA, actually.
Okay,
so Century Road Cycling Association. Yep. And they're kind of the big umbrella organization. And they had a women's only clinic, and a bunch of volunteers came out. And so, cycling can be a pretty inaccessible sport, but at the time it was actually quite accessible. I mean, financially it cost money. I was able to borrow a bike and other things and wear sneakers instead of all the expensive gadgets. It was pretty accessible in that they had this women's clinic, and then they had us do a sprint, and this woman came up to me and she's like, "Hey, you should try out for my team." And I was like, "What's a team?" I didn't know that they had teams. And so, well, I kind of knew because I knew it was more of a team sport than running. But then the more I learned about cycling, I just was like, this is great. It's like both a game and a race. And it's intellectual, but physical, it's endurance, but it's everything. And so I joined that local team and I just did some local races and kind of moved up from Cat 5 to Cat 4 to Cat 3 and made my way up. And then, I kind of just dove into it really quickly. I do everything pretty intensely when I decide to do it. I don't really half-ass anything. Like I'm either all in or not.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm like all in or I'm not in.
Yeah. And maybe that's like a New York personality. I don't know.
I think it's an athletic mindset too, though. I think it's like the same. I think it might be the same. It's like you're type
just
A
like a competitive type A person.
Totally.
Yeah. As soon as I started, I wanted to be really good, and so, I just started going to races every weekend and went on rides with my teammates, and then just got better and better. And then when I moved to California in 2018, I kind of picked up where I left off and started doing some local races, and I would travel almost every weekend to do races. And then through a local group ride, met Linda Jackson, who is the founder of Tipico Silicon Valley Bank, which is it was a pro Conti team at the time. And she invited me for coffee. I spoke with her, and then that's how I ended up joining Tipico. So it was kind of just, go to an introductory clinic, do some races, get better. And then,
so where were you,
somehow.
Were you recreationally riding? Like, were you riding on 9W and Central Park when you were living here? Like, did you do that whole thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would wake up. We had practice at 5 a.m. in Central Park with my team. So I'd wake up at 4:15.
Yeah,
exactly. So, I'd wake up at 4:15 every morning and go train with the team, and then come back, shower, get ready for work, be at work. And then in the wintertime, I was on the trainer every day. So did the 9W. In fact, the first time I ever rode 9W, I think it was maybe, a 50 something mile ride. And I'd only ever done laps around Central Park. And so I think we were 20 miles into it, and I was like, "Oh, we must be done by now." And and then we stopped for cake, and they said we were halfway through, and I was like, "Oh man, I don't know if I can make it home. I am so tired." So I always think back to that moment whenever I'm having like a hard moment in training, because I'm like, okay, I remember when I couldn't do more than 20 miles, without being worried that I wouldn't make it back. So,
is there a middle ground with cycling in terms of like getting into it, since you started here in the city with the cycling group?
Yeah, I actually do. I think the first thing is going on group rides, because that's where you really learn a lot of the bike handling skills, where the speed isn't as fast as a race. People aren't out to do anything at all costs to win. It's just everyone wants to be safe. Everyone wants to be, but you also you can learn pace lining. You can ride with other people. You can sometimes sprint for the town signs. You can do a lot of fun things. And I think, that was really helpful for me in the beginning, because I would practice with my team. And that's something that not all teams do. Like when I moved to California, we didn't practice together. We'd sometimes go on rides on the weekend. But when I was starting out, that was really helpful, is to just have experienced riders, and I could get on their wheel, or a safe wheel, and I'd just do group rides all the time in Central Park, and then also on the weekends. So I think that's a good one. And then, slowly and progressively do larger group rides. So going from, maybe 5 people to 20 people to 30 people, and doing bigger rides. I think the second thing is doing races. Sometimes the climbing races are actually a little safer, because you're going at a slower pace. And so you're going uphill. And it's very different from, say, a crit race where the speed is really, really high.
Right.
So I think if you do a race that is, more climbing, or the roads are really wide, and maybe it's a really long race or a Grand Fondo, then the speed's just going to be slower. And so the risk of crashing is not as severe, or at least if you do crash, it won't, maybe the damage would be less. And then I think the last thing is that, if you can, try to ride with more experienced riders, who are used to riding in groups and used to riding in pace lines, and who you can learn from, because A, they're a safer wheel, and B, they can also teach you how to be a safer wheel. So, riding with people who are used to riding a lot, I guess, would be another one.
I was riding with a coach in the city, a friend of mine, Anne-Marie Miller. I'm sure you know Anne-Marie.
Yep.
She's like faster than most men on 9W. She's like such a great athlete. It was great, because I was like, she was coaching me on like getting on her wheel, because I'm a triathlete. We have to ride 6 feet apart in most Ironman races, at least. And I usually ride by myself because I don't stop for donuts or lunch. And, all the cyclists are like relaxing, having a nice day. I mean, not all of them, but that's the vibe. And so it's so different. And I felt like, riding with her, I felt like I could tell, like I would be great in a Peloton, and I'm not worried about being close to people on the bike. Like I have great handling skills. I just think I've met a lot of women out on 9W recently who have just started cycling and who are doing like the cycling clinics in Central Park, and they say it's great. So I think it's a great advice is like if you want to get into racing or just group riding, right? Like, or doing these centuries. We share that mission of like wanting to get more women out on the road on bikes.
Yeah. And I think, the kind of progression I mentioned earlier was a bit of how to progress your skills, go from, ride on your own to small groups, to big groups, to grand fondos, to races. But also there's an intermediate, like if you're just looking to fill like a competitive drive as well. So maybe you ride on your own and you want to get a power meter and you want to hit certain power numbers, or maybe you want to go for Strava QOMs and you can go for the Strava QOMs, or you can join a Grand Fondo, which isn't really a UCI race, but you can still be competitive and you can do mass start races. And so I think you can also kind of get out that competitive drive early on and really work on that and have fun, and without kind of being in the hustle and bustle of the Peloton, if that is scary. And
was there a time in your career where you were sort of half corporate, like having your job and then half pro, or?
No, actually. So I was racing at the amateur level when I lived in New York. And then when I moved to California, I raced for a year at the amateur level, a year and a half. And in 2020, that was my first year as a professional. And it was also, I was working full time at venture capital as an investor. Okay. And that was really challenging. So that was the most like busy year probably of my life. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. every day, sometimes a little earlier if I had a commute. And days I would wake up at 5, go train for 2 to 3 hours, get to work, showered, looking ready to go to a meeting, not just, showing up to be on my computer, but ready to meet with CEOs and investors and know everything about their company, be up to date, everything well researched, starting around 8:30 a.m. And some days I'd stay at the office past 8, and then drive home, wake up the next day and do it all again. So I didn't have much time for a social life that year. Interestingly, that was also when COVID hit.
Overrated. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I think, I think, I've always been much more likely to hang out with my friends one-on-one. I don't go out super late. So it makes sense why I was waking up at 4:30 in New York City as a 23-year-old. But interestingly though, 2020 was my first year as a professional. I was still working, but it was also COVID. So I did one race. It was a gravel race in 2020, and then COVID hit and all the races were shut down. Yeah. So my plan that year originally was to take some Fridays off work and do weekend races in the country, kind of more domestic races. But then everything got canceled. And so I spent a lot of time on Zwift, and we actually got into Zwift racing as a team as a way to get our sponsors more exposure. So once Zwift racing happened, we did Tour of the Gila, we did the Tour de France, like all these kind of like Zwift races that were online, and we did those as a team. And then in the fall of 2020, my team invited me to Europe to race. And so then I worked half-time and remotely from Europe. And that was actually the most difficult period. It was a 2-month period. And my first race ever with the team was Ardèche, which is a 6-day stage race. And it has, I think it was 6 days, and it has 2-hour transfers every evening to the race. And so I was waking up at 6, responding to emails on the bus on the way to the stage, racing the stage, having like a protein shake and a baguette for dinner, coming back, being on Zoom calls. I had a board meeting over Zoom at, I think it was 11:30 p.m. my time while I was drinking a protein shake. And then I woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning to do more emails and race. And so that was really hard. And I would not advise that to anybody.
I was going to say, did anyone know on the work side that you were racing as well?
Well, my bosses, I was really transparent with my bosses about what I was doing because I wanted to make sure I had that honest communication with them. Yeah. But I don't know, if the CEOs and founders I was interacting with exactly knew what I was doing over there. Yeah, it was a 2-month block. And when I came back, I never thought being a professional cyclist and having a full-time job would seem easy. But when I came back from Europe and I wasn't in Europe racing and I was just living in California, then I was like, oh, this is so much easier. So everything is relative. But yeah, I think the hardest thing actually, it wasn't just the time management. It was also my first time really being with the team. And I wasn't able to attend team dinners. I wasn't able to do really long debriefs with the team. I was always kind of in my room, busy doing work. And I think that was actually the hardest part of it. It's just socially not being able to integrate the way I wanted to. So then when I came back, I knew that, I could be a good bike racer and I could be good at BC. I could be great at either one, but I couldn't be great at both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I realized that if I really wanted to do cycling, I wanted to go all in. And so then I left my job in January, at the end of January in 2021.
Okay.
And at that point I had enough savings lined up for my job that I knew I could just last the year. And then hopefully the following year I'd get a higher contract. And so yeah, it was a big risk. I think in the beginning, a lot of people raise their eyebrows, and they're like, you have an amazing job and an amazing life. Like, what are you doing? Just like getting up and leaving it all. And then
entrepreneurs hear that. Like people hear that all the time. Like when you want to start a new business, they're like, why are you giving up your job? And you're like, we are very different.
Yeah. And, the thing is, the hard thing was like, I really liked my job. I really liked my colleagues. I liked my boss. Like everything was like, I was really happy there. And there wasn't anything that was pushing me away. I just knew that being I'd been an athlete my whole life, and being a professional athlete is something I'd always kind of dreamed of. And I didn't really think it was possible. And then suddenly at, age 26, so 27, I don't remember how old I was. Yeah. I had this opportunity to do it full time. And I just knew it was either now or never. And it just felt right. Yeah. So here I am.
It is an opportunity, right? And it's a total career change, but it's like, you can always go back to venture capital, and you can always, how is it for women in the sport in terms of like, since we're talking about, quitting a job and like, having a very different salary and like winning races, like how does that work for women in the sport? I know it's different than for men, but
yeah, it's interesting. I always thought that I always thought that I had put myself into relatively sexist environments. Computer science, computer science, it's a pretty male dominated industry, and definitely was 10 years ago, when I started studying computer science. And then venture capital, incredibly male dominated, even more so when I started. And then when I came to cycling, though, it was by far the worst I'd ever seen, because it, at least in venture capital and in computer science, there's not this blatant disregard for the fact that, or acceptance of the fact that women and men just completely earn different salaries in cycling. There's men that earn 10 times as much as the woman, and there's no woman that earns as much as the highest man. The men had a minimum wage and the woman didn't at the time. There's just all of these things, the resources, everything. And everyone was just, everyone, I say that,
yes.
The vast majority of people just accepted that's how it was. And, were okay with it. And even if they weren't okay with the complete lack of equality, they seemed to be okay with some inequality. There was a bit of kind of me coming in as an outsider being like, WTF, like what is happening here? Like,
seriously.
This is not okay.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of people who'd been in the sport had seen a lot of the progress that had happened in the last 5 years or 3 years, in women's cycling. And there has been a lot of progress. And so they seemed to look at things with a very, they were motivated to create change, and they were continuing to make change, but they were also somewhat happy with the way things were progressing. And I came in and I was like, this is not okay. Like there's no part of this that we should be content with, like nothing. And so, I was pretty shocked actually when I came, and still am to a pretty large degree by some of the differences. And, it actually was nice my first year to be on a women's only team. I mean, Bike Exchange is they're really great about treating the women and then the same. Like we both have a bus, the women have a team doctor, the women all make the minimum wage of the men, the minimum wage for the women and men is the same. And they're very good that way. But also at the same time, there's things outside their control, right? That are just industry ride, and so having male colleagues on my team and seeing them be paid so much more and treated so much differently and access to just everything and the prize money, like all these things that maybe are race specific and not team specific, having it so up close is very different from being on a women's only team where I was just ignorant to a lot of that inequality. And so coming in on a women's only team in some ways was nice because I was kind of blinded by all the things that would have really turned me away in the beginning, probably. And I was able to fall in love with the sport seen some of it, but not all of it. And now that I'm deeper into the sport, I see a lot more, but now I'm too in love with the sport to run away. So it's, I'm here and, I want to make change.
All right, just dropping in here to give a shout out to our partners, Athletic Greens and AG1. AG1 is an all-in-one nutritional supplement. It has 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. It's easy to use. Just add 1 scoop to a cup of water daily. It's my go-to for getting in the essential daily supplements that I need. And since I'm always on the move, the travel packs are really my favorite. Adding AG1 to your wellness routine is a small micro habit with big benefits. It's one thing you can do every day to take great care of yourself. It contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, or anything artificial. And it tastes great. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/MarnieOnTheMove. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/MarnieOnTheMove to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, back to our conversation. Thanks to Zwift, and this is real, like I'm not just saying this because I love Zwift, but thanks to Zwift, like we're going to have the first big women's Tour de France this summer, and that's a really big deal. And, as somebody who's like worked in media for many years, I see like it's all about the eyeballs, right? Like when you look at like the NFL or the NBA, those sports are broadcast on major networks, and those players make so much money, and they get ad campaigns and Nike commercials and, all those things. And that's the sport, right? Like we're just talking about the sport, like not male, female, but like, that's just like the economy of scale of that sport.
Yeah.
It's how it's always been, and it's like, it's, the world of running, maybe, skiing, those things are a little bit closer to people having bigger salaries and payouts and sponsorships. But, for cycling, and it's just, it's more male dominated and always has been. And I wonder sometimes, it does come down to like the broadcast and the eyeballs, because that's like kind of what everything comes down to is like your database or your numbers or, so it's like, how do you get the numbers up? How do you get the visibility up? And I think, women are so much more exciting than men. And especially when they're like badass road cyclists, gravel cyclists, mountain bikers. There's a lot of room for growth for like women's visibility in this sport as pros to kind of like get out there in the spotlight. And it just takes like a couple companies to like really believe in the sport and make it happen. So that's what Zwift is doing. And I'm on a mission to try to highlight like all the cool female cyclists that are competing, because everybody knows the men. And if they don't know the men, that's cool too. But I think the women are like where it's at. And I think the sport is such a fun sport to watch. I mean, so much action and drama and excitement. And
I think Zwift has done more for women's cycling than almost any other organization that
ever
I'm aware of, at least, private organization. And I think for sure. I would argue that they've done more than any other group. I mean, if you look at the viewership of women's cycling, my parents, my family, my friends, they were only able to watch me race in the beginning because of Zwift, because, a lot of races weren't filmed several years ago. And the races on Zwift were shorter. And so they were able to tune in, and the announcers and everything, they learned about cycling through watching racing. Like they didn't understand what is the Queen of the Mountain and why does it break? Why did they let a breakaway go? And how does drafting work? And, why do you not just race hard the whole time? And, all these different aspects to racing and the dynamics and the team dynamics. And so they only learned about that through watching it on TV. And it was through watching it and hearing the announcers and learning about it that they became way more engaged with the sport, and they got really into it. And suddenly they started following even more and more. And without that viewership opportunity, they never would have understood cycling. They never would have been able to follow it. And the viewership for men and women was the same on Zwift. And so suddenly when real racing started again after COVID, there's a lot of pressure because people said, we were able to watch women race for a while and now we can't again. And so I think Zwift really did a lot for viewership, which, it catalyzed a lot of other things. And suddenly people were demanding a lot more equality than they did because Zwift had created an equal platform for men and women.
I think it's the time too, right? Like, I think it's just the time. I don't know if sometimes I think it's because I live in this world of like endurance sports and I'm so dialed in. But then I hear people that are not in this world talking about it. And I'm like, like people people that aren't athletic that, have been watching the men's Tour de France. And I was like, there's a women's Tour de France this year. And they're like, really? And
yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. I think because that has like the highest profile, like in terms of mainstream, right? Like the Tour de France. Like if anybody knows, if anybody can name any one cycling race, that's it, right? Like they might not know Paris-Roubaix or, the race that you did or Unbound Gravel or any of that stuff, but they'll know Tour de France.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know. I mean, I think it's an exciting time. Speaking of Zwift, you also are the Zwift eWorld US rep. So how did you get into esports?
Well, actually, so I started racing on Zwift, started during the pandemic. So actually, when I lived in New York City, I remember all my teammates were telling me about Zwift. Like everyone's telling me about Zwift. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And then like on the indoor trainer, it was really, wintertime in New York. And so that's where I first started Zwift, was in New York City in the wintertime inside. But then I found that it was a really, really good way to train that intensity during the wintertime because it was really hard to, get outside. And so it kept me in shape in the wintertime. It kept me engaged when I was on the trainer because otherwise the trainer can be really boring.
I know. I like binge watch movies. I not on Zwift, but like if I was just on my trainer.
And the thing about New York is if you don't train in the morning, then suddenly Central Park is full of people. And if you need a quick workout, you can't really get out of the city and back and do a good workout in 2 hours. And so Zwift was a really great training tool in New York City. And then when I moved to California and COVID hit, I was a big proponent of Zwift. And thankfully some races started happening online. But I think because I worked in technology and because I was a computer scientist, I had a lot more optimism about tech platforms and, new software and new gaming. And I think there are a lot of people who'd been in cycling. There were people with a very traditional mindset. This isn't cycling. This isn't, real racing. And there was some pushback in the very beginning. But I'm like, okay, so it's not the same as the road, but like everything's different. Like this is a whole new style, a whole new outlet of cycling, like a whole new discipline. And so I was really optimistic about Zwift and really excited when there was something for me to do, there was some kind of racing during the pandemic. And then when we started doing races as a team, that was just really fun. And and then I just, when I go home to Alaska, it's definitely my number one training tool. It's the only thing I can do in the wintertime. So I just find that, Zwift and e-racing, and it's a whole different style of training than riding outside. And it has a lot of benefits that you can't really get from outside, even just the erg mode on the trainer, forcing you to do certain power. And then you can't let up, there's no stoplights that are going to force you to stop. You just have to be going the whole time. And so the level of mental and physical focus and intensity is just different. And you really need that. And in the wintertime, I can tell if I didn't do any indoor training over the winter, then when my spring starts, I can notice I'm lacking some of that intensity.
I definitely spend a lot of time on the trainer in the winter. It's like, I love it. I love to, because it's like a treadmill, you're like, you have a specific workout, you hit your numbers, you do the watts that you need to do. And you can mimic any course that you're training for with all the different, courses in Watopia or, Macquarie or any of the places, London, New York, on Zwift. Yeah,
it's a very, very effective, efficient training tool. And it has a great feedback loop. I love the feedback loop when you're riding on the trainer.
Yes, that's true.
So if you're a type A person, you might like it.
I like it. I like it too. Yes. I think what I like, I also like the social component of Zwift. I don't know. It's fun for me. I mean, I still am like multitasking while I'm on Zwift, but I'm like not competing. So multitasking, I'll have like music on in the background, or I'll have like a show I'm binging, but I'm still dying on Zwift. Like I'm still engaged.
I really enjoy stories. I had a friend actually, and his son went away to college, and the dad and the son always used to go on bike rides when the son was growing up. And so when the son went away to college, they started doing Zwift rides together. So once a week they would get on Zwift and they would ride together. And it's stories like that make me smile a lot.
Yeah, I did. I met some people on Zwift and did rides with them throughout the pandemic. I feel like Zwift kind of like saved my mental state when it came to exercise and fitness during the pandemic with the bike. I mean, I'd never been so into the trainer. I've always had a trainer, but I always like riding outside until Zwift. I know you also are a gravel cyclist. Talk to me about how you got into that and if you like it and where your graveling is leading you.
Yeah, I really enjoy gravel racing. You know, I think there's a part of me like the Alaskan kind of off the beaten path, you know, likes to adventure, the wilderness, like that very much aligns with my personality and kind of who I am. I originally thought that I wanted to just stay in the US and do a lot of gravel racing, but I really wanted to compete at the most competitive level. And at the time, you know, a lot of the most competitive racers are in Europe doing a lot of these big races and tours. And so I came over to Europe and I'm not able to do as much gravel racing over here just because our schedule is pretty full with road racing. But I do, you know, I have a gravel bike. I go gravel riding and it's really nice to just get off the beaten path every now and then. And I think if I ever leave the world tour, like I'll go back to the US and do, you know, all those gravel races. And so, exactly. So it's kind of a balance, you know, I want to be able to do both, but logistically it's really hard because a lot of the gravel scene is in the US and, you know, unfortunately a lot of the European teams don't give as much credibility to gravel as they do the road racing. And a lot of American gravel racers don't give as much credibility to some road racing as they do gravel. So in a way, it seems like they're still very separate worlds that don't have a lot of crossover. It seems like people start with gravel and then go to road, or they start with road and then they go to gravel. And there's not as many teams willing to let riders do both throughout the whole season. And part of that's that they, you know, they're not super conducive to each other. Like you need a much bigger, you know, gravel is much more about an endurance engine, and road racing, you need to have a lot more punch and being able to cover attacks like constantly. And there's the team dynamic. And so it's a very different style of racing. And so I think if you really want to be world-class at one, then you should be focused on one.
Well, that's like the age-old concept of like focusing, right? Like,
yeah. And I think, you know, I don't think you need to exclusively do one. Like, I still think there's a lot of benefits to cross training, doing some like doing a little bit of both. But I do think that just the way that the system is set up, the way that the race schedules are set up, you know, we don't have a lot of road racing grand tours in the US. We don't have a lot of big gravel races in Europe. And so logistically, as a racer, it makes it really hard to be very competitive and to be a leader in both at the same time. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I don't love gravel and I don't want to do all these gravel races that I see. Yeah. And it just means that there's going to be a time for each. And I tend to do a lot more gravel in the off season as a training. So.
I saw some of the pro triathletes do Unbound gravel this year, like Heather Jackson, another pro that I had on the podcast. And I always wonder, like, are they doing it competitively? Because when you're a competitive athlete, people expect you to be competitive at everything you do on the pro level. And I don't think you have. And I'm surprised you're not a triathlete. Swimming, running, cycling.
It's funny. I actually, growing up, would do triathlons, but cycling was my weakest link because growing up, I was a swimmer and I also did cross country running. And so when I moved to New York, originally I went to an introductory cycling clinic because I wanted to learn how to ride my bike because I was considering joining a tri team. But then the more I learned about the team dynamic of cycling and the more that I cycled, I just realized I really loved it and I actually enjoyed it a lot more.
During the pandemic, I got really into cycling. I always knew that I liked cycling. Like, I started riding when I was 4. I was mountain biking when I was 18. And I started triathlon 12 years ago. But before that, I always rode my bike as a means of commuting or recreationally. I mean, I wasn't a road cyclist by any means. I, didn't even have a road bike. I had a mountain bike. I think I had a hybrid. But I love it, and and so during the pandemic, kind of took the opportunity since there were no triathlons. Like you said, like you have to focus on one sport, right? So I couldn't get into cycling the way I wanted to in the past or do any centuries because all of my races that were 70.3s, like I had to focus on, doing a 56-mile bike and then running off the bike, not a 70-mile bike. So exciting for me that I didn't have to worry about running off the bike and I could just go for a bike ride and not worry about my time and like enjoy New York and get out. And so I really got into it and now I'm really into it. And I only did one century, but I love it. I love cycling. And I definitely want to do some gravel, but I have so much to do in the world of cycling.
One of my mentors, actually professional mentors at work, once said to me that the most valuable employees are T-shaped. which is when they're really deep in one area and they're really broad in a lot of areas. And it just shows that, I think it's important to have a broad set of skills, but then being able to also have some kind of core value that you bring that's unique and that you are really world-class at or a specialist at. So.
Yeah. I mean, and are there any other lessons that you get from your work and career that you kind of bring to the sport and vice versa?
Oh, there's a lot. There's so many. It's funny. We're all kind of going through life applying different skills to different settings, but a lot of times it's the same skills. Yeah, I think one is taking calculated risks. In a bike race, you have to be really, really patient. But then when the opportunity comes, you need to go. And it can be risky, but you need to take it when it's there. And the same is true with venture capital. I would look at sometimes 20 companies a day, and we might do 2 investments a year. And, I would see so many different opportunities, and it just wasn't right. It wasn't right. It wasn't right. And to the point when you finally see one that is right, it's almost like you don't believe it. You have to you want to stop and be like, wait, what? And, but then you have to jump on it right away. And that's kind of what happens in a bike race too. It's like the opportunities, patient, you have to wait. And there might be good opportunities that go by, but if it's not great, then you have to be patient. And then when there's the right one, you just have to jump on it. So that's one lesson. Another one is just being able to communicate really well. I think this is something that I'm a lifelong learner at. I'm not perfect at communication. I don't think anyone is, but I'm always striving to get better. And, I'm in venture capital. I was really young. I was working with CEOs who were much older than me, way more experienced than me professionally. And I had to speak eye to eye to them. And in cycling, it's a little different, but I have teammates from around the world. We speak different languages. We come from different cultures. The way that we approach communication and team dynamics is different. And so, just being a really good communicator is something that you need in any kind of team environment, whether that's professional or athletic. And I think the discipline that goes into all of them, the time management, the ability to manage stress, how do you perform under stress? All of those things, I think, applied to my professional life and my athletic life.
And so what was your first bike and what are you riding now?
First bike, that's a tough question. Yeah, there were a few. So it depends what you define as my first. I think when I was in 5th grade or something, we had a truck bike at home that we bought, and a flat pedal bike. That's where so I had a truck bike, and then the ex-boyfriend's bike was a Le Mans, and that's what I used for my first year when I was learning how to ride with clip-in pedals. And then my first bike that I ever bought for myself, that was a real road cycling bike, that was a Liv. And it was actually a replica of Marianne Voss's bike that she rode that year. Yep. And I got it in New York, and it was a Liv Envy bike, okay. I think. And I really like that bike. So now I'm also riding a Liv. So, yeah. So now it's kind of full circle. I'm riding a Liv right now as well. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have multiple sets of wheels for different conditions, but what were your first wheels? And you're tall, right?
I'm 5'6". So I was actually really short for a rower. So I was kind of between heavyweight and lightweight rowing, because I was a little bit too muscular to be a lightweight, but too short to be a heavyweight. So I was always kind of oscillating between the two. For wheels, we actually, I didn't change wheels that much because we have our sponsor wheels. So right now we have Cadex wheels from Giant. And
in terms of sizes, though, yeah.
I ride 28s on the road. I'm not doing that much off-road right now, though. So I don't ride that one. So I don't change my wheels and my tires that much because most of the conditions that I'm training in right now are pretty similar. So I would say, my equipment right now is pretty consistent, actually.
And so are you on tubeless or tubular?
We ride tubeless, yeah.
Did you love it?
Yeah, I do like it a lot. I think it just depends on the kinds of roads. Some people will swear ride tubeless or not, or, all these things. But I think so much of it depends on the conditions you're riding in.
Yeah.
I was in Hawaii and there were these little thorns on the road everywhere. And I hated having tubeless because it would pop it, and they actually were so thick that it wouldn't reseal. And so I just needed to change my tube every time, or reverse. In Hawaii, there were thorns. And so I wanted tubeless. Yeah. Whereas on other roads, say there's a lot of potholes, then you actually are more likely to get a pinch flat. And then it's so it depends on the kind of terrain. And I think it also depends on the kind of training you're doing, the kind of riding.
I think I've graduated my bike 2 years ago, but I just haven't upgraded it, and I'm upgrading it now. I love my bike. So it's the perfect, I'm 5'1". It's the perfect bike for me because it fits me, which is not so easy.
Yeah, no, bikes are so interesting because, yeah, you can change any component on your bike and you can change all your components and then it's equivalent to buying a whole new bike because you've changed everything on it. So, you can be constantly upgrading, you can be constantly upgrading it. Or you can just say, goodbye and buy all new stuff at the same time. But I actually think that's one of the nice things about bikes is that you can upgrade whatever you want when you're ready to upgrade that thing. And you don't have to make the huge investment to buy a whole new bike when you just really want to change one thing. So yeah, they're pretty modular that way.
Yeah, I do like that. I do live in Manhattan and have now a collection of old bikes in my apartment.
And plus one. Yeah, bikes are also really personal, the way you ride, the way that you distribute your weight, the way you corner, the way you turn, like everything is just, some bikes feel super smooth to some people and other people don't like them. And it's just, I think there's a side. Some people think like some bikes are just better, like some bikes are better than others. And maybe they judge that by how much they cost or the material. And I think, it's such a specific thing. It's like a saddle in a way, the saddle is more personal than a bike, but like there's so many things that are just personal preference. And I think people don't give enough credit to just, how there's a lot of bikes and one's not better than the other. It's just like what fits better for you. Like, do you prefer like a long stem or a shorter stem? Like everyone's different. Like it just depends.
That's why it's so important to get fit. And I think that and over the pandemic, there were a lot of people that got into cycling that, didn't have any education about it. And they just went to their bike shop and got sold a bike that maybe wasn't, the best fit for them, because they weren't doing the custom fit. But that's kind of a whole next level, but it really is game changing for your experience on the bike. And it's true. It's like every bike could be potentially great, but just not great for you. And so I feel like that's the quest I've been on, right? Yeah. But back to you, what races do you have lined up for, the next few weeks, and what are you competing in? And yeah.
In 2 days, I leave for the Tour de Suisse, and that's a 4-day stage race in Switzerland, which I'm quite excited about. It'll be my first time doing it. And then after that, we have the Tour de France. And then I'll probably be doing Battle of the North, maybe Plouay, and World Championships. So I think that's next on my agenda for now.
Where are World Championships?
They're going to be in Australia this year. So it'll be fun because I'm on an Australian team. So I think there will be a lot of excitement and hopefully I'll have more people cheering for me this year at the World Championships because,
that's awesome.
I'll know some people down there. So, I'm excited.
You've been traveling to all these places?
Been to the countries that we're going to race in Europe, but I have never been to Australia. So
that's cool.
That'll be a really fun experience for me.
Do you feel like I know when you're riding and you're competing and racing, you're like super focused on like being in that zone, but is there any place that you've loved cycling where it's just so beautiful and you're like, I can't believe I'm here?
Oh, so many places. So many places.
Have to be during a race. It could be like training.
Yeah, I did a ride from Nice to Milan in 2018. It was a multi-day tour, and through Interlaken in Switzerland, actually. That's when I was looking at the landscape and I just thought, how is this earth so beautiful? Yeah. So I think that's one thing I love about cycling is that you really get to see the world. And, running, you can get off the beaten path as well, but you just can't see as much as you can cycling. And cycling, you can really you can see so much because you can cover a lot of ground, and yet you can cycle anywhere in the world for the most part, where there's a road. So, or off-road. So yeah, I love it for that reason.
What's your strong point when it comes to cycling? Like, are you a climber? Are you a sprinter? Are you all those things?
Oh, that's a good question. It's interesting. I'm a bit of an all-rounder. Like, I wouldn't say I'm not the best climber. I'm not the best sprinter. And I'm not the best time trialist, but I can do all of them pretty well. Maybe not sprinting as much, but, I think my superpower is just like as the race goes on, I fatigue slower than most people. So if you put a big climb at the beginning of the race, I'll get dropped probably by the climbers. But if you put it at the end of the race, I'll be able to keep up with them much more so, just because I feel like I fatigue a lot slower than other people. So I think I have just really good endurance. And so, I guess the race is won at the end, not at the beginning. So for me, that's what I focus on. Yeah. I don't specialize in any one thing, but because I can do all of them well enough, I usually can make it to that final selection. And then it's kind of, how do I finish? What's the actual finale look like? So
yeah, that's pretty
depends.
Cool.
But I really like to attack. Like I like to go on solo attacks at the end of races. So I'd say that's also my style. Is to just try and go out solo and finish alone.
So like the engine.
Yeah, more so.
That's cool. Off the topic of cycling, are you reading any great books, watching any great shows? Like, what are you into beyond cycling?
I'm waiting for the third Ted Lasso season to come out.
Ted Lasso always coming out. I love that show.
No, not soon, but I'm just waiting for that. I'm less of a TV person. I'm more of a podcast person. Let's see. I listen to Jay Shetty a lot.
Okay.
His On Purpose podcast.
Yeah.
And yeah, I read books. I've been trying to read through the books on Reese Witherspoon's
I love her
book list. She has a pretty good selection, I think, of books that she has in her book club. But yeah, I would say.
Did you read Where the Crawdads Sing?
I haven't read it. It's like one of the few I haven't read yet, and I don't want to watch the movie before I read it, so I haven't watched it yet. But it's on my list.
I mean, I love what she's done with her career and her brand and her company and her books. I mean, I don't read a lot of fiction, but I would. I keep, I want to, but I do listen
her
to
shows on Apple TV were amazing. I really liked Little Fires Everywhere, and I also really liked the morning show. So I think it's Hello Sunshine.
Hello Sunshine is the name of the company.
I think she's done a really good job with her production company. So I think those are just some of I'm going to altitude camp in Andorra in 2 weeks. So I'll have a lot of free time to watch movies and TV shows and read. So maybe if you ask me in 2 weeks, I'll have more answers for you.
I don't know. I'm not reading anything specific. I got Priyanka Chopra's autobiography.
Oh, I've read her autobiography. It's actually really good. Yeah, she has some good quotes. Yeah.
So I like her a lot. I think she's super cool. And I would love to have her on the podcast. Good luck with all your racing. I mean, have fun. Maybe that's better.
Thank you. And I can always use a little extra luck. Cycling there's always a little bit of luck in cycling. So I'll take it all you want to give.
All right.
So.
Well, we'll be cheering for you at all your upcoming races. And thanks for coming on the podcast. And this has been awesome. Thanks. And keep on inspiring all the cyclists out there and people that are working in corporate America that feel like this overwhelming drive to escape that life.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for tuning in to Marnie on the Move. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social at Marnie on the Move for Facebook and Instagram, and Marnie Salup on Twitter. Head over to our website, marnieonthemove.com, for more